The article I will be speaking about now is Active Fantasy Sports Rationale and Feasibility of Leveraging Online Fantasy Sports to Promote Physical Activity. So, pretty much, this article focuses on AVGs, which is a abbreviation for active uh, video games. And pretty much this article gives like a unique turn on the fact that it talks about physical activity related to fantasy sports, which is the first article that I've seen that talks about this. And pretty much in the breakdown of this article, it's trying to explore like the feasibility of new AVGs, which is active video games, and it focuses on two different fantasy sports. Mainly, it focuses on fantasy baseball and fantasy basketball, and it tries to see how playing those sports and the motivating factors in playing those sports, how they can affect having physical activity. So I wrote down that fantasy sports come with physical. There's reasons or ways that there could be physical activity, and there was five main reasons that they talked about. One was that it's extremely popular; a lot of people play it. Another one was that it is a long term. So you play for a while. The seasons can be for a long time, and you play with certain people, so you be more motivated and you have more time to do physical activity. It motivates you seeing like the players, when you see the athletes play, you're like, maybe I want to be like that. The money wise, maybe it motivates you to have money. You're like, every time your player scores or does something, you do push ups or some certain reason to work out like that. And then physical activity generated by the athletes. So, also, again, like three, seeing the athletes, and that might motivate you. So now when it comes to the methods of this experiment, there was two studies and two groups that they had. Um, they selected these groups by getting 18 and up and making them get people, adults that are 18 and up who play fantasy baseball and basketball, and giving them a consent form talking about if they get injured in any way during the physical activity. So what they did pretty much was they interviewed them before talking about their experience with fantasy sports, and they gave them a Fitbit with different ways to do physical activity involving fantasy sports. So, for an example, fantasy baseball, they were like, if you say you lose or you get last place, points wise, you have to drop a player, or no, if you don't reach your physical activity goal. So if you don't go to 10,000 steps a day, which is what they did for both sports, or if you don't do a certain amount of push-ups a day, then you get consequences during the game. So now when it came to the results in baseball, for baseball, there was 30% more physical activity when they involved the physical activity in fantasy baseball. When it came to they averaged the fantasy baseball, they averaged their steps per day. They averaged more steps per day than because they try to get to the 10,000. When it was coming to fantasy basketball, which was the second study, they noticed that the steps were kind of the same. So there could be a difference in fantasy sports. And they also noticed that there's a social support motivating factor for physical activity. So it depends like the social support. And they also noticed that when it comes to answering the final question, fantasy sports does help adult physical activity. And I felt this article showed a pretty good way through baseball and basketball that fantasy sports can motivate you and can make you be better at doing more physical activity.